The stench hit me first. Not the usual Washington, D.C. cocktail of exhaust fumes and political bullshit, but something deeper. Sulfur mixed with rotting meat, seeping through the ventilation system of the Hart Senate office building like a disease crawling through the veins of democracy itself. I pressed my back against the cold marble wall, feeling the weight of blessed silver bullets in my vest pocket, each one carved with symbols older than this country, older than most civilizations that had risen and fallen while these demons waited in the shadows. Senator Patricia Hawthorne was supposed to be in her office reviewing the defense budget. The official schedule showed her there until midnight, working on amendments that would allocate billions to black budget projects. Instead, she was 3 floors down in a basement that didn't exist on any official blueprint, chanting in a language that predated human civilization by millennia. I'd been tracking her for 6 months. 6 grueling months of watching her voting patterns shift from moderate conservative to something that served interests no human could comprehend. The transformation had been subtle at first. A vote here, a policy change there. But the pattern emerged like a cancer growing in the body politic. Immigration bills that created specific refugee routes through areas with high concentrations of ancient burial grounds. Defense spending that funded facilities with no listed purpose, built on coordinates that corresponded to old-world summoning sites. Healthcare policies that required blood samples from citizens in targeted demographics, always focusing on specific bloodlines that seemed random unless you understood what these creatures were really harvesting. The final piece clicked when I witnessed her eat raw meat during a committee hearing. Not openly, but I saw her tear into something bloody she kept in her briefcase when the cameras weren't rolling. She'd done it with the methodical efficiency of a predator, never breaking eye contact with the witness she was questioning about veterans' benefits. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was something wearing a human face, deciding the fate of soldiers who'd bled for their country, while she fed on flesh like the monster she'd become. Now, crouched in the ventilation shaft above what the demons probably thought was their secret sanctuary, I could see everything through the metal grating. The chamber below stretched larger than should have been possible given the building's architecture, as if reality itself had been bent to accommodate this unholy space. 12 figures in expensive suits formed a perfect circle around an altar made from what looked like fossilized bone. But I knew better. Those were human remains, compressed and transformed through rituals that turned the deceased into conduits for otherworldly power. In the center, Hawthorne knelt naked, her human skin rippling like water as something underneath tried to break free. Her mouth moved in perfect synchronization with the others, but the words that came out belonged to no earthly throat. Each syllable seemed to vibrate through dimensions, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. Veltar neth grimo, asathul mor vindesh, krex nometh thulgai. The air itself seemed to thicken with each syllable, taking on an oily quality that made breathing feel like drowning. My military training kicked in. Count the targets, assess their weapons, plan your exit. But this wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This wasn't even like the previous demon hunts I'd conducted in abandoned warehouses or forgotten churches. These enemies wore the faces of people who made laws, controlled budgets, decided whether kids got school lunches or whether veterans received health care. They held security clearances, commanded respect, had the power to start wars or prevent them. Through my scope, I recognized 3 more faces that made my blood run cold. Congressman Reynolds from Ohio, Supreme Court Justice Hayes, and General Mike Hollander from the Joint Chiefs. Each one had voted on legislation I'd traced back to suspicious patterns over the past year. Reynolds had sponsored bills that seemed designed to weaken religious protections and remove crosses from public buildings. Apparently, consecrated symbols caused the demons physical discomfort. Justice Hayes had written opinions that gradually eroded laws protecting ancient burial sites and historical landmarks, many of which served as natural barriers against demonic incursions. And Hollander, God help us all. Hollander had access to nuclear launch codes. They weren't just infiltrating the government. They were systematically dismantling every protection humanity had built up over centuries, preparing the way for something that would make this little gathering look like a church picnic. The temperature in the chamber began to drop, and I watched in horror as the altar started to crack down the middle. Something was trying to push through from the other side, something that required this specific ritual, these specific people, this specific location to manifest. The bone altar wasn't just a ceremonial piece, it was a dimensional anchor, and they were about to pull something through that had no business existing in our reality. Hawthorne's transformation accelerated. Her spine elongated with wet, cracking sounds that echoed off the stone walls, pushing her torso upward as her ribs expanded beyond human capacity. Her fingers stretched into claws that scraped against the floor, leaving gouges in stone. When she opened her eyes, they glowed like molten copper in the dim candlelight. And I could see intelligence there. Ancient, malevolent, and utterly alien. "The harvest grows strong, brothers," she said, her voice now a harmony of 3 different tones that seemed to come from multiple throats. "The blood of the faithful flows through our networks. The military bends to our will. The courts serve our justice. Soon, the awakening begins. Soon, our Lord walks among the sheep, and they will know they're true shepherds." The other figures responded in unison, their voices creating a sound that human vocal cords should never have been able to produce. "His will be done, His kingdom come, His reign eternal." I'd heard enough. Time to work. The grating came away silently. I'd loosened the screws during my reconnaissance yesterday, a trick learned from years of urban warfare where preparation meant the difference between completing the mission and becoming a casualty. Dropping 15 feet into the chamber, I landed in a combat crouch with my blessed Colt 45 already drawn. The first shot took Congressman Reynolds' center mass before any of them realized their ritual had been interrupted. His body erupted in black smoke that smelled like burning hair and sulfur. The thing inside him shrieked as it was banished back to whatever hell spawned it, leaving behind only an empty suit and the lingering stench of brimstone. The human body crumpled like a discarded puppet, already beginning to decompose at an accelerated rate as the demonic essence that had been keeping it animated fled back to the abyss. "The hunter!" Hawthorne's demonic voice echoed off the stone walls, causing several of the candles to flicker and die. "Kill him! Protect the circle! The ritual must be completed." But demons possessing human bodies move differently than trained soldiers. They're strong, unnaturally so, with reflexes that operate outside normal human limitations. But they haven't spent years learning how to fight in close quarters, haven't drilled movements until they become muscle memory, haven't learned to think 3 steps ahead while bullets are flying. I put 3 more blessed rounds into the crowd, watching as each hit target sent another screaming entity back to the abyss, their human hosts collapsing like marionettes with severed strings. Justice Hayes lunged at me with fingernails that had become 6-inch claws, moving faster than any human could. His face had begun to elongate, jaw unhinging to reveal multiple rows of teeth like a deep-sea predator. I rolled left, came up firing, and caught him in the shoulder. The impact spun him around, black ichor spattering across ancient symbols carved into the wall, causing them to hiss and smoke where the demonic blood touched the protective wards. That's when I made my mistake. I focused too much on the immediate threats and forgot about General Hollander. The possessed Joint Chiefs member tackled me from behind with the force of a freight train. We went down hard, my weapons skittering across the stone floor toward the altar. His hands wrapped around my throat, and I felt his strength. Not just physical, but something that tried to reach into my mind and squeeze my soul like a ripe fruit. The touch carried memories that weren't his. Centuries of possessions, thousands of human lives consumed, entire bloodlines corrupted and turned to serve the darkness. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he hissed, his breath hot against my face, reeking of decay and something sweet that made my stomach turn. "We are in your schools, your hospitals, your police stations. We write your laws, command your armies, decide who lives and who dies. One hunter cannot stand against the tide. We have been preparing for this moment since your species first learned to use fire." I drove my knee up into his solar plexus, rolled him over, and pressed my backup weapon, a consecrated silver knife blessed by 3 different faiths, against his throat. The metal hissed where it touched his skin, sending up thin wisps of smoke. The demon inside Hollander's body recoiled, but not far enough. "Maybe not," I gasped, fighting to catch my breath while keeping the blade steady. "But I can make a hell of a dent, and I've been making dents for 15 years. I drew the blade across his throat. This time, the scream that emerged as the demon was banished came from multiple voices, as if I'd somehow wounded more than just the one possessing his body. The sound reverberated through dimensions, and I felt answering cries from far away. Other demons feeling the pain of their brother's banishment. The remaining figures scattered like roaches when you turn on the lights. Hawthorne's transformed body moved with inhuman speed toward a corridor I hadn't noticed before, her elongated limbs carrying her in a skittering gait that hurt to watch. The few remaining possessed officials followed, leaving behind the stench of sulfur and something else: fear. They were afraid of me. Good. Fear was a weapon I could use. I retrieved my .45 and checked the bodies. Each one was beginning to return to normal human appearance, the demonic alterations fading as the entities that had worn them like masks returned to whatever realm they'd crawled out of. But these weren't random possessions. These were strategic infiltrations, carefully planned and executed over years, maybe decades. The demons had been patient, methodical, building their network one corrupted soul at a time. On the altar, I found documents that made my blood run cold. Lists of government positions marked for acquisition, with detailed psychological profiles of the targets. Maps showing migration patterns across the country with specific coordinates marked in red, each one corresponding to locations I recognized as sites of previous supernatural activity. And worst of all, a timeline written in multiple languages, some human, some definitely not. The awakening wasn't some distant threat. According to these papers, it was scheduled for next month, during the joint session of Congress, when the president would deliver the State of the Union address. Every major figure in American government would be in one room, and if even half of them were already possessed. I photographed everything with a camera, modified to capture supernatural phenomena, knowing that regular film wouldn't record demonic writing. The images would serve as evidence, assuming I lived long enough to show them to someone who could act on the information. A sound echoed from the corridor where Hawthorne had fled. Footsteps, lots of them getting closer. Heavy boots on stone, but moving in perfect synchronization. Security, or more demons. Either way, my time was up. I grabbed the most important documents and headed for my exit route, a service tunnel that connected to the DC metro system. The passage had been excavated during World War II as part of a continuity of government plan, but like many wartime secrets, it had been forgotten by subsequent administrations. Perfect for someone who needed to move unseen beneath the Capitol. But as I reached the opening, Hawthorne's voice drifted back through the stone passages, no longer entirely human, but not yet fully demonic. The sound carried in weight that pressed against my mind like a physical force. We know who you are now, Lucas Peck. We know where you live, where you sleep, where you hide your blessed weapons. We know about your sister in Portland, your nephew in college. The hunt ends tonight, but not the way you planned. You have won this battle, but the war is already lost. The tunnel ahead stretched into darkness, and somewhere in that blackness I could hear them waiting. But for the first time in 6 months, I had real intelligence about their plans. Now, I just had to survive long enough to use it. The abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath Union Station reeked of rust and decades-old diesel fumes, but it was clean air compared to what I'd breathed in that demonic chamber. I'd been running through DC's forgotten underground for 3 hours, using routes I'd memorized during my first year hunting these creatures. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every echo could signal pursuit. My hands shook as I spread the stolen documents across a makeshift table formed from stacked concrete blocks. The photographs from my modified camera revealed text that shifted and writhed on the page, demonic script that hurt to look at directly. But mixed in with the otherworldly languages were names, dates, and locations written in perfect bureaucratic English. The scope of infiltration was worse than my darkest fears. According to these files, the demons hadn't just possessed random government officials. They'd been systematically targeting specific bloodlines for over 2 centuries. Families whose genealogies traced back to the original colonial settlements. Families like mine. I found my own name on a list titled Priority Elimination Targets. Next to it, detailed intelligence about my movements, my weapons caches, even my psychological profile written with clinical precision. They knew I favored blessed silver ammunition. They knew I'd lost my parents in what the official reports called a gas explosion. But what I'd discovered was actually a demonic assault when I was 16. They knew everything. But more terrifying was what they knew about my family tree. The Peck lineage went back to Salem, Massachusetts, to a woman named Sarah Peck, who'd been accused of witchcraft but never tried. According to these documents, Sarah hadn't been a witch. She'd been something far more dangerous to the demons. She'd been a natural-born hunter, someone whose bloodline carried genetic immunity to demonic possession and the ability to sense supernatural corruption. The demons had been hunting my family for 300 years, killing us off generation by generation. I wasn't just some random vigilante who'd stumbled onto their conspiracy. I was the culmination of centuries of selective breeding, the latest in a bloodline they'd been trying to exterminate since before America was a nation. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Basement of the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. Midnight. Come alone, or your sister dies. They'd found Rebecca. Of course they had. I checked my watch. 11:17 p.m. 43 minutes to cross the city, gear up, and walk into what was obviously a trap. But if there was even a chance Rebecca was alive, I had to try. She was the only family I had left, the only person who knew what I really did for a living and didn't think I was insane. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca, 3 years younger, sitting in our grandmother's kitchen while the old woman taught us both about the family history. Gran had called it fairy tales, but her eyes had been deadly serious when she'd shown us the antique weapons hidden in the cellar, when she'd made us memorize incantations in Latin, when she'd drawn symbols on our bedroom doors with salt and blessed water. "The monsters are real, children," she'd whispered one winter night when our parents were out. "They've always been real. And they remember our family name." I thought she was suffering from dementia. Rebecca had thought it was all an elaborate game. We'd both been wrong. Gran had been preparing us, training us, passing down knowledge that had kept the Peck bloodline alive for centuries. When the demons finally found our parents, Gran had known exactly what had happened. She'd armed me with my first blessed weapons and sent me hunting. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of tracking demons through government buildings, corporate boardrooms, and suburban churches. 15 years of discovering that the conspiracy went deeper and higher than anyone could imagine. 15 years of wondering if I was fighting a war that could never be won. Now they had Rebecca. I gathered the documents and stuffed them into a waterproof bag, then began the journey back to my safe house. The building looked like any other abandoned warehouse in Southeast DC, but the basement had been converted into something between an armory and a monastery. Blessed weapons lined the walls. Silver bullets carved with protective symbols, blades forged from meteorite iron and consecrated by priests from 7 different faiths. Tactical gear inscribed with wards that had protected my family for generations. I strapped on Kevlar beneath a shirt painted with protective symbols, loaded my .45 with fresh blessed rounds, and tucked a pair of consecrated knives into boot sheaths. The demons might know my methods, but I'd been adapting my tactics for 15 years. Tonight, I'd give them some surprises. The Smithsonian Natural History Museum at midnight was a different world from the bustling tourist destination most people knew. Security guards made their rounds with practiced indifference, never bothering to check the basement storage areas where the real treasures were kept. Areas where a person could disappear without anyone noticing for hours. I bypassed the alarm systems using codes I'd acquired during a previous hunt. Demons weren't the only ones who infiltrated government institutions. Sometimes you needed human allies in strategic positions, people who understood that some secrets were worth keeping. The basement stretched further than the building's blueprint suggested, just like the chamber beneath the Heart building. These creatures had a talent for bending architecture to their needs, creating spaces that existed in the gaps between dimensions. Emergency lighting cast long shadows between towering storage racks, filled with artifacts that would never see public display. I found them in the deepest section, in a room that housed items too dangerous for exhibition. Rebecca was suspended 3 feet off the ground, unconscious but breathing, held in place by chains that glowed with the same hellish light I'd seen in the ritual chamber. Around her stood 5 figures in expensive suits, but their human disguises were slipping. Senator Hawthorne was there, her transformation more complete now, her spine curved at impossible angles, her limbs stretched beyond human proportions. "Welcome, Lucas Peck," she said, her voice a harmony of different pitches that made the air itself vibrate. "Last survivor of a bloodline that has caused us considerable inconvenience. I kept my weapon trained on her while scanning for other threats. "Let her go. Your quarrel is with me." "Our quarrel is with your entire species," replied a voice from behind me. I spun to face a man I recognized from news broadcasts, Secretary of Defense William Crawford. But his eyes held the same copper glow as the others, and when he smiled, his teeth had multiplied into rows like a shark's. "Do you know how long we've been preparing for this moment?" Crawford continued, circling me slowly. "How many years we've spent infiltrating your institutions, corrupting your leaders, preparing the way for our Lord's arrival. Your bloodline has been the one constant obstacle, the one force capable of disrupting our plans." Around the room, more figures emerged from the shadows. I recognized faces from television, from newspapers, from the halls of power I'd been tracking for years. A federal judge, the director of the FBI, 3 senators, a 4-star general. All of them possessed, all of them part of a network that reached to the highest levels of American government. "The awakening begins in 18 days, Hawthorne said, her elongated fingers tracing symbols in the air that left burning after images. "During the State of the Union address, when every major figure in your government will be gathered in one place. Our Lord will manifest through the President's body, and every camera in the world will witness the moment humanity officially surrenders its independence." "The President isn't possessed," I said, though even as the words left my mouth I wasn't certain. Crawford laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Not yet, but he will be, along with everyone else in that chamber. We've been preparing the ritual for months, seating the Capitol building with the necessary anchors, positioning our people in key locations. Your species has always been eager to surrender its freedom to strong leaders. We're simply giving you the strongest leader imaginable." The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about infiltrating the government. It was about staging a public transformation, a visible moment when humanity would watch their leaders become something else entirely. The demons weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing to reveal themselves, confident that a terrified population would submit rather than resist. "But first," Hawthorne hissed, "we must eliminate the bloodlines that could interfere, starting with yours." She gestured, and the chains holding Rebecca began to tighten. My sister's unconscious form convulsed as whatever force held her started to squeeze. I opened fire, putting 3 blessed rounds center mass into Crawford's chest. He staggered backward, black ichor spraying from the wounds, but remained standing. The others rushed me simultaneously, moving with inhuman speed and coordination. The fight was everything I'd trained for, and nothing I could have prepared for. These weren't just possessed humans. They were creatures that had been refining their combat techniques for centuries, borrowing the muscle memory and tactical knowledge of every host they'd ever inhabited. Crawford fought with the precision of a special forces operator. Hawthorne moved like a predator that had studied every form of combat humans had ever developed. I rolled between the storage racks, using the confined space to my advantage. Silver bullets carved with protective symbols did more than physical damage. They disrupted the demonic essence itself, causing the entities to lose cohesion. But there were too many of them, and they were learning my patterns. A federal judge whose name I couldn't remember tackled me from behind, his human mask completely fallen away to reveal something that had never been human to begin with. Scales covered his skin, and his mouth had become a lamprey-like sucker lined with rotating teeth. I managed to get my silver knife between us, driving it up under his ribs. The scream that emerged could have shattered glass. "Enough!" Hawthorne's voice carried supernatural authority that froze every figure in the room. "The girl dies now. Let him watch his bloodline end." The chains around Rebecca began to constrict, and I could see her body contorting under the pressure. That's when training gave way to something deeper. The fury that had driven my family to hunt these creatures for 3 centuries. I pulled out my final surprise, a grenade modified with blessed metal fragments and inscribed with banishment symbols from every major religion. The pin came out as I rolled it toward the center of the group. "Biblical proportions, you bastards!" The explosion filled the room with silver light and the sound of multiple dimensions colliding. When the smoke cleared, 4 of the demons had been banished back to hell, their human hosts lying empty and still. But Hawthorne remained, wounded and furious, her true form now fully visible. Something that had never been human, something that belonged to nightmares and ancient texts. "This changes nothing," she snarled, her voice coming from multiple throats. "You cannot stop what comes in 18 days. The awakening will proceed. Your sister will die, and you will watch our Lord claim this world as his dominion." She vanished into shadows that shouldn't have existed in a well-lit room, leaving behind only the scent of sulfur and burning flesh. I rushed to Rebecca, cutting away the supernatural chains with my blessed knife. She was unconscious, but alive, breathing steadily. As I carried her toward the exit, I noticed something that chilled me more than the demonic threats. The storage room held artifacts that most people would never see. Ancient stone tablets, prehistoric weapons, carved symbols from civilizations that had vanished millennia ago. But scattered among them were modern items, government documents, military hardware, communication equipment. The demons hadn't just been using this place as a meeting spot. They'd been cataloging human history, studying our weapons, our strategies, our weaknesses. They'd been preparing for this moment since before recorded history began. 18 days until the State of the Union address. 18 days to figure out how to stop an enemy that had been planning this coup for centuries. As I carried Rebecca through the museum's empty corridors, one thought echoed in my mind. I wasn't just fighting for my family anymore. I was fighting for the soul of humanity itself. And I was running out of time. 18 days became 17, then 10, then 3. I'd spent every waking hour preparing for what I knew would be my final hunt. The abandoned warehouse had become a war room, its walls covered with intelligence gathered from every source I could access. Rebecca, recovered but shaken, had proven invaluable. Her background in computer forensics allowed her to trace digital footprints that revealed the true extent of demonic infiltration. The numbers were staggering. Of the 535 members of Congress, we'd identified at least 200 as confirmed or suspected possessions. The Supreme Court was completely compromised. Half the Joint Chiefs, 3/4 of the federal judiciary, and an unknown number of state governors were under demonic control. The conspiracy wasn't just widespread, it was systematic, methodical, and had been building for decades. But we'd also found something the demons hadn't expected us to discover. A weakness. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pointing to a pattern she'd uncovered in government communication logs. "Every possessed official communicates with a central command structure using the same encrypted network. They're not independent operators, they're all connected to something." I studied the data streams she'd mapped across multiple screens. The network showed a clear hierarchy, with all communications flowing to and from a single node, located directly beneath the Capitol building. "It's like a hive mind," she continued. "Cut off the head, and the whole network collapses. But Lucas, the signal strength required for this kind of coordination, whatever's down there, it's not just another possessed human." I knew what it was. The documents from the Heart Building had referenced the Vessel, a human host prepared specifically for their Lord's manifestation. Someone who'd been conditioned from birth to contain an entity that no ordinary human body could survive. The President. Thomas Harrison had been groomed for the role since childhood. Born into a political dynasty, educated at institutions where demonic influence ran deep, surrounded his entire life by advisors who'd slowly conditioned him for this moment. He wasn't possessed yet. The entity they planned to summon was too powerful for premature manifestation. But during the State of the Union address, with every major figure in American government present to provide psychic anchor points, he would become something that had never walked the earth. "I have to get into the Capitol," I told Rebecca. "Tonight, before the address, while most of the network is still distributed." "It's a fortress," she replied, pulling up security schematics. "Secret Service, Capitol Police, military contractors. They've locked it down tighter than Fort Knox. I know someone who can help." Agent Sarah Chen had been FBI for 12 years before she'd stumbled onto evidence of supernatural corruption in her own agency. Like me, she'd lost family to demonic attacks disguised as accidents. Unlike me, she'd managed to maintain her position within the system, feeding intelligence to hunters like me while building a network of clean agents who knew the truth. We met at a 24-hour diner in Arlington, the kind of place where nobody looked twice at two people having an intense conversation over coffee at 3 a.m. "You're insane," Sarah said after I'd outlined my plan. "Even if you somehow get inside, the basement levels beneath the Capitol are a maze. Miles of tunnels, multiple security checkpoints, and that's assuming you can reach the central chamber before they detect your presence. What about your people inside? 3 clean agents in positions that matter. Maybe 4 if Agent Martinez isn't compromised. We haven't been able to verify his status. She slid a tablet across the table. Building schematics, security rotations, and access codes that will work for about 6 hours after I input them. After that, the system cycles and you're locked out. I studied the plans. The Capitol's basement levels were indeed a labyrinth, but there was a pattern to them. Older sections built during World War II connected to even older tunnels from the 1800s. And beneath those, sections that predated the city itself, native burial grounds and natural caves that the demons had undoubtedly converted for their purposes. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My contacts in the Secret Service report that the president has been different for the past month. Mood swings, speaking to people who aren't there, and his security detail found him in the Oval Office at 3 a.m. 3 nights ago, staring at the wall and whispering in a language no one recognized. The conditioning was accelerating. In 36 hours, when Harrison stood before Congress to deliver his address, the entity would have a prepared vessel ready for complete possession. The speech would become an incantation, broadcast live to millions of viewers, creating a psychic network that would allow demons to manifest anywhere humans were watching. "I need one more thing," I told Sarah. "Access to the congressional chamber itself during the address." "Absolutely not. I won't let you turn a joint session of Congress into a battlefield. It's already a battlefield. The question is whether humanity wins or loses." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. Finally, she looked up with the expression of someone who'd just signed her own death warrant. "There's a service tunnel that connects to the chamber's ventilation system. I can get you that far. But once you're inside..." She shook her head. "Lucas, what you're describing isn't just assassination. It's declaring war on entities that have been preparing for this moment since before America existed. Then it's time they met someone whose family has been preparing just as long." The next 30 hours passed in a blur of final preparations. I modified every piece of equipment I owned, inscribing additional protective symbols, blessing every round of ammunition with water from 7 different sacred sites. Rebecca helped me create a device that would broadcast a counter-frequency to disrupt the demonic communication network, assuming we could get close enough to their central node. The evening of the State of the Union address, I watched the president's motorcade arrive at the Capitol building on television. Harrison looked normal, presidential, but I could see the subtle signs that others missed. His movements were too precise, too controlled. His smile never reached his eyes. And when the cameras weren't on him, his expression went completely blank, as if no one was home behind those eyes. "Whatever happens tonight," I told Rebecca as I checked my gear one final time, "get as far from DC as possible. If I fail, they'll come for everyone connected to our bloodline." "You're not going to fail," she said, but her voice carried no conviction. At 11 p.m., I entered the Capitol through a maintenance entrance Sarah had unlocked for me. The building felt different at night, older, heavier, as if the weight of centuries of political maneuvering had somehow seeped into the stone itself. But beneath that familiar atmosphere, I sensed something else, a wrongness that made my skin crawl and my blessed silver bullets grow warm in their clips. The tunnels beneath the Capitol were exactly as Sarah had described, a maze of passages from different eras, each layer telling the story of the building's expansion over 2 centuries. But as I descended deeper, following coordinates Rebecca had calculated from the communication network data, the architecture began to change. Stone gave way to something that looked almost organic, walls that curved in impossible ways and seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. I found the central chamber 3 levels below the building's official basement. The space was vast, carved from living rock in patterns that hurt to look at directly. At the center stood a throne made from what looked like fossilized bone and meteoric iron, surrounded by communication equipment that belonged to no human technology. Cables snaked across the floor like veins, connecting the throne to transmission arrays that reached up toward the congressional chamber far above. And seated on the throne was someone I recognized, Chief Justice William Morrison, the Supreme Court Justice who'd been confirmed just 6 months ago. but his human appearance was a thin veneer over something ancient and terrible. His eyes were solid black, and when he spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. "Lucas Peck, the last hunter. We wondered when you would find your way here." "Justice Morrison, I presume," I said, keeping my weapon trained on his center mass. "Or should I call you by your real name?" He laughed, a sound like glass breaking in reverse. "Names have power, Hunter. My true name would burn your mind to speak it. Morrison will suffice for our brief conversation." Brief? In 12 minutes, the President will begin his address to Congress. The words he speaks will open doorways that have been sealed for millennia. Every possessed official in that chamber will serve as an anchor point, creating a network powerful enough to allow my Lord to manifest fully in this reality. And once he walks among you... Morrison's smile showed too many teeth. "Well, your species has always been eager to worship superior beings." Through the chamber's communication systems, I could hear the President beginning his speech upstairs. His voice carried through the stone, but the words were wrong. Not English, but something older and more dangerous that made the air itself vibrate with malevolent energy. "You cannot stop this," Morrison continued. "Even if you destroy me, the network will hold. Too many of us, in too many positions of power. Your democracy was always an illusion, Hunter. We have simply chosen to drop the pretense." I pulled the trigger. The blessed silver round took him center mass, and Morrison's scream shattered half the electronics in the chamber. But he didn't fall. Instead, his human disguise began to dissolve, revealing something that belonged in nightmares. A creature of shadow and bone and burning eyes that had never been bound by the laws of physics. "Did you think it would be that simple?" the entity asked, its voice now coming from multiple mouths. "I am not some minor demon possessing a human host. I am the architect, the one who has guided your species' development for thousands of years. Your religions, your governments, your technologies, all of it designed to bring you to this moment." Above us, the President's voice grew louder, the inhuman syllables of his speech echoing through the building's structure. I could feel reality beginning to warp around the edges, as if the walls between dimensions were growing thin. That's when I activated Rebecca's device. The counter-frequency burst filled the chamber with sound that existed on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Every piece of demonic communication equipment began to spark and smoke. The cables connecting the throne to the chamber above severed themselves, spraying the walls with something that wasn't quite electricity. Morrison, the architect, staggered as his connection to the network collapsed. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his inhuman features. "Impossible," he snarled. "The frequency... How did you..." "My grandmother wasn't just a demon hunter," I told him, advancing with my silver knife drawn. "She was a scholar. She spent 60 years studying entities like you, learning your weaknesses, documenting your methods, and she passed all of that knowledge down to me." I drove the consecrated blade into what might have been his heart. The architect's death scream echoed through dimensions I couldn't perceive, and I felt the psychic backlash as hundreds of possessed officials across the country suddenly found themselves cut off from their demonic controllers. But as Morrison's form dissolved into shadow and sulfur, his final words chilled me to the bone. "This victory is temporary, Hunter. We are patient. We will adapt. And there are so few of your bloodline left." The chamber began to collapse as whatever force had held it together failed. I ran for the exit, following my memorized route back through the maze of tunnels while the building shook around me. Behind me, I could hear the sound of stone falling and something larger. Reality itself settling back into its proper configuration. I emerged into the Capitol's main level just as chaos erupted throughout the building. Secret Service agents were helping the President, who had collapsed mid-speech and was now convulsing on the podium. Congressional members were evacuating in confusion as officials who had been possessed moments earlier suddenly found themselves with gaps in their memories and no understanding of where they were or what they had been doing. The network was broken. The awakening had been prevented, for now. But as I slipped away into the DC night, I carried with me the knowledge that this had been just one battle in a war that had raged for centuries. Somewhere out there, other demons were already adapting, planning, preparing for their next attempt at conquest. The President would recover, with no memory of his conditioning. The possessed officials would be confused but unharmed, and the world would never know how close it had come to losing its freedom entirely. That was fine with me. Some truths were too dangerous for general consumption. I found Rebecca waiting at our predetermined rendezvous point, her face showing relief when she saw me approaching. "Is it over?" she asked. I thought about Morrison's final words, about the scope of the conspiracy we'd uncovered, about how many demons were still out there, biding their time. "This part is," I said, "but the war never really ends. It just pauses between battles." As we drove away from the capital, I caught my reflection in the passenger window. I looked older, more worn, but also more determined. The Peck bloodline had survived another generation. Somewhere out there, other families with similar legacies were probably carrying on their own battles against the darkness. The demons were patient, but so were we. And as long as people like us existed to stand guard against the night, humanity would have a chance, even if they never knew what we'd saved them from. The radio crackled to life, broadcasting news of the president's medical emergency during the State of the Union address. Officials were calling it exhaustion, stress, the pressure of high office. I smiled grimly and turned up the volume. Let them think it was something ordinary, something explainable. The truth would only give people nightmares. Besides, we had work to do. Somewhere in America, another demon was probably putting on a suit and running for office. And when they did, we'd be waiting. The hunt never truly ends. It just waits for the next monster to show its face.